As summer faded into autumn, I packed my belongings for university, ready to begin the next chapter of my life. No one offered to drive me to campus. I took the bus, my few possessions packed into 2 suitcases, heading toward a freedom I had only dreamed about. State University became the first place where I could breathe without the constant weight of comparison pressing down on me. Moving into my dormitory, I felt a strange lightness, as if I'd left more than just physical distance between myself and my family. My roommate Tara was a music major from Seattle who respected my space and became my first real friend at college. "Where are your parents?" she asked as we arranged our side of the room, watching other families help their children settle in. "They couldn't make it," I answered, simply unpacking my books alone. The freedom of being away from home was intoxicating. I could choose my own schedule, eat what I wanted, and most importantly, I could speak without being interrupted or dismissed. In my Intro to Journalism class, Professor Bryant asked for my opinion on an ethical question, and when I answered, he nodded thoughtfully and built upon my response. Such a simple interaction, but it nearly brought me to tears. Someone was actually listening to me. I declared a double major in journalism and psychology, fascinated by both the power of storytelling and the complexities of human behavior. Perhaps understanding family dynamics would help me make sense of my own childhood. My papers on narcissistic family systems earned top marks, with one professor suggesting I consider publishing my research. Contact with my family dwindled to occasional text messages and rare phone calls. Each holiday break brought the question of whether to return home. The first Thanksgiving I did go back, only to find nothing had changed. James, now in community college, was struggling in his classes but still treated like a prodigy by my parents. "He's just not being challenged properly," my mother insisted over turkey dinner, while James texted under the table, completely disengaged from the conversation. "His professors don't recognize his unique way of thinking." I listened silently, recognizing the familiar script. When my father asked about my studies, he interrupted my response to tell James about an internship opportunity he'd found for him. I returned to campus early, claiming a research project needed attention. For subsequent breaks, I found alternatives. I stayed with Tara's family one Christmas, accepted Samantha's invitation for spring break, and took summer classes to avoid long stretches at home. When visits were unavoidable, I kept them brief and emotionally detached, treating my childhood home like an uncomfortable hotel. In my junior year, I discovered my passion for investigative journalism while working on the university newspaper. I uncovered a scheme where a campus organization was misusing student activity funds. Despite pressure to drop the story, I persisted, gathering evidence and conducting interviews until the truth was undeniable. When the article was published, it led to real accountability and change. "You have a natural instinct for this," my editor told me. "You see patterns others miss, and you're not afraid to ask uncomfortable questions." That same year, James dropped out of community college. My parents called to tell me, but strangely, there was no disappointment in their voices. "He's taking time to find his path," my mother explained. "College isn't for everyone. He has entrepreneurial aspirations." These aspirations apparently consisted of living at home, playing video games, and occasionally working part-time jobs that never lasted more than a few weeks. Yet my parents spoke of these minimal efforts as if he were building the next Microsoft. During my senior year, I began therapy with Dr. Winters, a compassionate woman who helped me understand the golden child scapegoat dynamic that had shaped my childhood. She introduced me to concepts like gaslighting and emotional neglect, giving names to the experiences I had endured. "What you're describing is a common family dynamic," she explained. "The golden child, your brother, is idealized and can do no wrong, while the scapegoat you carries all the family's projected negative emotions. It's not about either of you as individuals, but about your parents' own unresolved issues." Understanding the pattern didn't erase the hurt, but it helped me stop internalizing the blame. I wasn't overlooked because I was unworthy of love. I was overlooked because of a toxic family system that needed someone to play the role of the problem child, regardless of my actual behavior. My college graduations arrived with both excitement and apprehension. I had earned highest honors, secured a prestigious internship at the Chicago Tribune, and received the journalism department's annual award for excellence. My parents did attend, arriving just before the ceremony began and leaving immediately after to accommodate James's job interview at a local electronics store. "We're sorry we can't stay for your celebration dinner," my mother said, already putting on her coat. "James really needs our support right now. This could be a big opportunity for him." I nodded, no longer expecting anything different. My friends and professors celebrated with me instead, toasting my achievements and future prospects. Professor Bryant pulled me aside during the reception. "I've watched you grow into an exceptional journalist and critical thinker," he said. "But more importantly, I've seen you develop the resilience to stand in your truth even when others can't see it. That will serve you better than any degree." A week later, I accepted a full-time position with a respected regional newspaper in Chicago and prepared to move even farther from Portland. As I packed my apartment, I felt not just physical distance growing between me and my family, but also an emotional detachment that was both liberating and somewhat sad. I was creating my own life, one where I could thrive without constantly seeking validation that would never come. My early career in Chicago marked the beginning of true independence. The city's energy matched my own determination as I threw myself into building a life completely separate from my family's influence. My small apartment in Wicker Park became my sanctuary, decorated exactly as I wanted with secondhand furniture and art prints I loved. For the first time, every decision was mine alone. At 23, I established a pattern of limited contact with my family. Monthly phone calls to my mother, briefer ones with my father, and generic birthday and holiday cards were the extent of our relationship. Each conversation followed a predictable script: brief questions about my work that were never truly listened to, followed by lengthy updates about James's latest endeavors, all presented with an enthusiasm never extended to my achievements. "James is exploring opportunities in sales," my mother would gush, though these opportunities seemed to change every few months as he drifted between jobs. "That's nice." I would respond neutrally, no longer investing emotional energy in pointing out the double standards. Meanwhile, my career was flourishing. I had found my niche in investigative journalism, specializing in exposing corruption and advocating for those without a voice. My series on housing discrimination won a regional press award, and I was building a reputation for thorough research and uncompromising integrity. The newspaper assigned me increasingly important stories, and my byline began appearing on the front page with regularity. "You have a gift for making complex issues accessible without oversimplifying them," my editor Natalie told me during a performance review, "and you're not afraid to follow the evidence even when it leads to uncomfortable places." I thought often about how these traits that earned me professional respect were the same ones my family had dismissed as being difficult or too sensitive. The irony wasn't lost on me. At 25, I was promoted to senior reporter with my own investigative column. I celebrated with friends at a rooftop bar overlooking the Chicago skyline, feeling a sense of accomplishment that was entirely my own. That same week, my mother called to tell me that James had been let go from his latest job. The manager just couldn't recognize his innovative approach. She explained, the familiar excuses flowing easily. "But it's actually perfect timing because he's thinking of starting his own business." This business required a substantial loan from my parents, which they eagerly provided. I bit my tongue, knowing any questions about my own college fund that had been sacrificed for James's legal fees years ago would only lead to accusations of bitterness. As I approached 27, my investigations began targeting larger systems of corruption. I exposed a kickback scheme in city government contracts that led to multiple resignations and criminal charges. My work was becoming more visible, occasionally picked up by national news outlets. I had found my purpose using my voice to uncover truths others preferred to keep hidden. That spring, my father turned 60. Despite my ambivalence, I flew back to Portland for his birthday weekend, a brief visit I framed as a professional obligation to minimize my time at home. Walking into my childhood house felt like stepping into a museum of dysfunction, every corner, holding memories of invisibility and unequal treatment. The house itself had deteriorated somewhat, with obvious repairs needed on the sagging porch and peeling exterior paint. Inside, I immediately noticed tension in my mother's tight smile and my father's distracted manner. James, now 23, lounged on the couch, scrolling through his phone without looking up when I entered. "Emma," my mother said with forced brightness, "you look professional." It wasn't until the second day of my visit that I discovered the truth behind the home's disrepair. While helping my mother prepare dinner, I overheard her anxious phone call with the bank. From the fragments of conversation, I pieced together that my parents had remortgaged their home to pay off James's gambling debts, a substantial sum that had nearly depleted their retirement savings. Later that evening, I witnessed firsthand how James had evolved from the golden child into something more troubling. When my mother asked him to help clear the dinner dishes, he erupted in anger. "I'm not your servant!" He snapped, his face contorted with entitlement and rage. Why don't you ask your perfect daughter since she's so desperate for your approval? My mother immediately began placating him. Of course, Jamie, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Emma and I can handle it. My father said nothing, retreating behind his newspaper as he had done throughout my childhood. The familiar dynamic remained, but with a darker edge. James wasn't just favored now, he was feared. After dinner, finding myself alone with my father, I cautiously approached the subject. Dad, I'm concerned about what's happening here. It seems like things are difficult financially, and James appears to be struggling with more than just employment issues. Your brother is finding his way, he responded defensively. Not everyone follows a conventional path like you did. This isn't about conventional paths, I pressed. This is about him taking advantage of you and Mom. The gambling, the failed jobs, the anger. Don't you see what's happening? What I see is you judging your brother when you've barely been part of this family for years, he retorted. You've always been jealous of the special bond James and I share. The conversation devolved from there, with my father growing increasingly agitated as I tried to address the reality of their situation. When my mother joined us, she immediately took his side, accusing me of stirring up trouble during a family celebration. The breaking point came the following morning. I walked into the kitchen to find James verbally berating our mother for not having his preferred breakfast food available. His words were cruel, laced with profanity and thinly veiled threats about what would happen if she didn't get her act together. I stepped between them. That's enough, James. Don't speak to Mom that way. He turned his anger toward me. Oh, look, the prodigal daughter returns and suddenly has opinions on how this family works. Where have you been for the past 5 years while I've been taking care of things here? Taking care of things? I echoed incredulously. You're living in their house, gambling away their retirement and treating them like servants. That's not taking care, that's exploitation. The argument escalated until I finally confronted all three of them about the toxic dynamic that had shaped our family for decades. This isn't healthy, I insisted. James needs professional help, and you both need to stop enabling behavior that's hurting everyone, including him. My mother's response cut deeper than I expected. You've always been jealous of your brother's special qualities, Emma. Not everyone can be as coldly perfect as you pretend to be. In that moment, I realized nothing would change. They were committed to their narrative regardless of the mounting evidence that it was destroying their lives. I packed my bags that afternoon, pausing at the door for what I knew might be a final attempt to break through. I love you both, I said quietly. But I can't watch this anymore. Someday you'll see the truth about James and the role you've played in creating this situation. I hope it's not too late when that happens. I left Portland with a strange mix of grief and liberation. My attempt at intervention had failed, but I had spoken my truth clearly for perhaps the first time. The 2 years that followed were marked by silence from my family. No calls, no cards, not even acknowledgement of my birthday or Christmas gifts. I had been excised from the family narrative, my role as scapegoat no longer necessary in my absence. I focused on building my chosen family in Chicago, deepening friendships, and creating a community that valued authenticity and mutual support. My career continued to advance as I tackled increasingly significant investigations. The silence from Portland was painful at times, but also confirmed what I had long suspected: my value in that family had never been about me as a person, only about the role I played in their dysfunctional system. At 29, I had established myself as a journalist, known for integrity and thorough investigation. My apartment walls displayed framed copies of my most impactful articles, tangible reminders that my voice had found its power. I had recently begun work on a series examining financial exploitation of vulnerable populations, a topic that resonated with my personal understanding of power imbalances. The morning that changed everything began like any other. I was reviewing research at my desk when Patrick, a colleague from the news desk, approached with an unusual expression. Emma, we just received an anonymous tip about financial fraud at a charity organization, he said, placing a manila envelope on my desk. Normally I'd handle it, but the charity has connections to Portland, Oregon. Given your background there, thought you might want first look. I thanked him, expecting nothing more than a routine investigation. Opening the envelope, I found financial documents, correspondence, and photographs related to a charity called Northwest Community Foundation. The organization supposedly provided support to low-income families, but the documentation suggested a pattern of funds being diverted to personal accounts. As I began tracing the paper trail, a familiar name jumped out from the documents: James Thompson, listed as a financial consultant for the charity, had received substantial payments for vague services. My brother's name in black and white connected to what appeared to be systematic fraud. I stared at the documents, my heart pounding. Professional ethics demanded I recuse myself from an investigation involving family, but I needed to understand the scope before passing it along. Digging deeper, I uncovered a disturbing pattern stretching back 3 years. The charity appeared to be a sophisticated front for embezzlement, identity theft, and elder fraud. James wasn't a minor player. He was at the center of the operation. Evidence suggested he had been stealing identities of elderly donors, opening credit lines in their names, and siphoning money through the charity's accounts. The sophistication of the scheme was startling, especially given James's history of short attention spans and abandoned projects. This showed planning, manipulation, and a complete disregard for vulnerable victims. Most disturbing was a list of victims that included names I recognized. The elderly couple from our neighborhood whose property James had vandalized years ago appeared as major donors, though the documents suggested they had no knowledge of these contributions. Their identities had been used to secure loans and credit cards, their good names exploited by someone they had once shown kindness to. I sat frozen at my desk, ethical dilemmas swirling. As a journalist, I had a responsibility to report wrongdoing without personal bias. As a sister, even an estranged one, this discovery was devastating on multiple levels. Not only was James harming innocent people, but the inevitable exposure would destroy my parents who had sacrificed everything to protect him. After hours of internal struggle, I requested a meeting with my editor, Natalie. In her office, I laid out the situation with complete transparency. "I've discovered my estranged brother is potentially involved in a major fraud case," I explained. "I can't be involved in the investigation or reporting due to the conflict of interest, but I believe this story needs to be pursued." Natalie listened attentively, her expression compassionate but professional. "Thank you for bringing this forward, Emma. Your integrity is why you're valued here. I'll assign Marcus to the investigation and you'll be completely firewalled from the process." I handed over all the materials, feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. Marcus was an excellent investigative reporter, thorough and fair. The truth would come out as it should, but without my fingerprints on the process. Over the following weeks, I maintained strict professional distance as Marcus built the case. The investigation expanded beyond the initial charity to uncover a network of fraudulent activities spanning several states. James had apparently been using my parents' address for some of his schemes, potentially implicating them through their willful blindness, if not active participation. When the story finally broke, it was more extensive than even I had anticipated. Marcus's thorough reporting detailed years of fraud with estimated damages exceeding $2 million. Elderly victims had lost life savings, and the charity's legitimate causes had been deprived of funds. James's name and photograph appeared prominently along with those of his 2 accomplices. The morning the story ran, my phone rang for the first time in 2 years with my mother's number. I answered with trepidation. "How could you do this to your brother?" she demanded, her voice raw with anger and tears. "Your own family." "I didn't do this, Mom," I replied calmly. "I recused myself from the investigation the moment I recognized James's involvement. But he did this to himself and to all those innocent people he stole from." "You've always been jealous of him," she accused, falling back on the familiar narrative. "You must have guided this reporter, told him where to look." "The evidence spoke for itself," I said. "James made his choices just as you and Dad made yours in how you raised us." The conversation devolved from there, with my mother cycling through denial, bargaining, and renewed anger. Before hanging up, she delivered news that sent a chill through me. "Your father had a heart attack last night when the police came to arrest James. He's in the hospital. I hope you're satisfied with your revenge." The accusation stung despite its irrationality. I had not sought revenge. I had merely stepped aside to allow truth its natural course. Nevertheless, the news about my father shook me deeply. After a sleepless night weighing my options, I requested a week of leave from work. It was time to return to Portland, not to gloat or validate myself, but to face the wreckage of a family system that had finally imploded under the weight of its own dysfunction. The flight to Portland gave me hours to prepare myself emotionally, yet nothing could fully ready me for what awaited. I had arranged to stay with Samantha, my old bookstore coworker, whose family had shown me more genuine care in occasional interactions than my own had in a lifetime. She picked me up at the airport, her warm hug providing strength for what lay ahead. Whatever happens, you have people who know your worth, she reminded me as we drove toward the hospital. Remember that. Providence Portland Medical Center loomed large, its windows reflecting the gray Oregon sky. My father had suffered a moderate heart attack, not immediately life-threatening, but serious enough to require ongoing care. As I approached his room, my mother emerged from the doorway, her face hardening at the sight of me. "You shouldn't have come," she said flatly. "You've done enough damage." "I'm here because he's my father," I replied evenly, "and because it's time we dealt with reality as a family." She allowed me to enter but remained vigilant as though I might somehow harm my father further by my presence. He lay propped against pillows, looking suddenly old and diminished. The confident, sometimes intimidating man of my childhood had been replaced by someone frail and vulnerable. "Emma," he acknowledged weakly, his expression unreadable. "Hi, Dad," I said, taking the chair beside his bed. "I'm sorry about what happened." He looked away. "James says the newspapers exaggerated everything, that it was all a misunderstanding about investment strategies." The denial ran deep even now. "Dad, James is facing federal charges. The evidence is substantial and documented." "This isn't a misunderstanding," my mother interjected sharply. "He made mistakes, but he's still our son. You abandoned this family years ago, so you don't get to judge how we support him." I took a deep breath, maintaining my composure. "I didn't abandon the family. I created distance from a dynamic that was harmful to everyone, including James. And supporting him doesn't mean denying reality." The conversation circled painfully with my parents, alternating between accusation and justification. I learned that James was being held without bail due to flight risk, having apparently been planning to leave the country before his arrest. He had refused my request to visit him, unsurprising given our estrangement. Over the next few days, as my father's condition stabilized, more details emerged about the extent of James's crimes. Bank statements revealed he had been stealing from our parents as well, draining accounts they thought were being used for his business ventures. Their retirement savings were almost entirely gone, and the house had multiple liens against it from creditors I suspect they didn't even know existed. "He said he needed the money for startup costs," my mother explained tearfully when confronted with the evidence. "He promised it would all come back tenfold when his business took off." It was the first crack in her absolute defense of James, a small recognition that perhaps things were not as they had seemed. My father, too, began showing signs of emerging from denial as his medical condition improved. On the fourth day, I brought a box to the hospital that I had retrieved from Samantha's attic. Years ago, I had left some childhood belongings with her family for safekeeping, including journals I had kept throughout my youth. With my father more alert and my mother momentarily absent, I opened the box. "I want to share something with you," I said, taking out a blue notebook from when I was 12. "I think it's important you understand what our family looked like from my perspective." I read selected entries chronologically, each documenting specific instances of unequal treatment, dismissal of my achievements, and the constant elevation of James, regardless of his behavior. My father listened silently, his expression gradually shifting from defensive to troubled. May 31st. I read from a high school entry. "Got my scholarship letter today. Full tuition to State University. Showed Mom and Dad at dinner. Dad said, 'That's nice,' and immediately started telling James about basketball camp options. Sometimes I wonder if I disappeared entirely, whether anyone would notice before dinner needed to be cooked." I closed the journal and looked at my father. "I'm not sharing this to hurt you or to say I told you so. I'm sharing because I think we need truth between us if anything is ever going to heal." For several minutes, he said nothing. Then, with effort that seemed both physical and emotional, he reached for my hand. "I don't know if I can accept everything you're saying," he began slowly, "but I can see that we failed you in important ways. I'm sorry, Emma. I truly am." It wasn't a complete acknowledgement, but it was the first genuine apology I had ever received from either parent. We sat in silence after that, the weight of decades of misunderstanding between us. My mother's journey toward recognition was slower and more painful. When she discovered the extent of financial devastation James had caused, including identity theft, using her own personal information, her carefully constructed narrative began to crumble. I found her sobbing in the hospital cafeteria one afternoon, a stack of bank statements before her. "How did we not see?" she asked, looking genuinely bewildered. "How did we let it get this far?" "You saw what you wanted to see," I answered gently. "We all have blind spots when it comes to people we love." As my father's health improved enough for discharge planning, difficult practical matters required attention. Their house was at risk of foreclosure, their credit destroyed, and significant legal challenges lay ahead to disentangle them from James's schemes. They would need to rebuild their lives from the ground up well into what should have been their retirement years. I remained in Portland for James's initial court appearance, though I didn't attend the proceeding. The evidence was overwhelming, and he accepted a plea agreement that would still result in substantial prison time. My parents finally faced the reality that their son had systematically defrauded dozens of vulnerable people while exploiting their own unwavering support. The evening before I was scheduled to return to Chicago, I had a final conversation with both parents in their living room, the same space where my diary had once been read aloud and mocked. "I need you to understand something," I said carefully. "I didn't pursue this investigation or seek revenge against James. But I also won't apologize for the work I do, which is exposing truth regardless of who it impacts." My father nodded slowly. "I believe you, Emma. And I think I understand better now why integrity matters so much to you." My mother's response was more complex. "I still don't understand how you could build a life so separate from us. Family is supposed to stick together. Family is supposed to support each individual member's growth and well-being," I countered. "Sometimes that means creating distance when patterns are harmful." We didn't reach perfect understanding or magical reconciliation. Years of entrenched patterns couldn't dissolve in a week of crisis, but something had shifted fundamentally. The family mythology had been disrupted, allowing space for a new narrative to potentially emerge. I returned to Chicago with mixed emotions, but a profound sense of weight being lifted. The child who had been invisible was finally seen, not because I had forced recognition, but because truth had made itself undeniable. I hadn't sought revenge. I had simply stepped aside and allowed reality to unfold. In the months that followed, I maintained cautious contact with my parents as they began the long process of rebuilding their lives. Our conversations were tentative, but more honest than they had ever been. The golden child scapegoat dynamic had been broken not by my efforts to change it, but by the inevitable consequences of the system itself. My career continued to flourish as I channeled my experiences into advocacy for the voiceless. Understanding how easy it is to be silenced made me a more effective voice for others facing injustice. The personal knowledge of how families can both wound and heal informed my reporting with nuance and compassion. James was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. I neither celebrated nor mourned this outcome, recognizing it simply as the natural consequence of his choices. My parents attended his sentencing, supporting him still, but with eyes finally open to the reality of who he had become under their care. Looking back on the journey that brought me here, I realized that healing doesn't always come in the form we expect. As a child, I fantasized about dramatic moments of vindication where my parents would suddenly recognize their unequal treatment and beg forgiveness. The reality proved both more painful and more profound. True healing began not when my family acknowledged their mistakes, but when I acknowledged my own worth independent of their recognition. Building a life based on integrity and authenticity was not an act of revenge, but of self-preservation, and ultimately, self-love. The justice that finally came wasn't something I orchestrated, but rather the natural outcome of choices made by each family member over decades. The relationship with my parents today exists within careful boundaries. We speak monthly, exchange emails, and have gradually established a new dynamic based on adult interaction rather than old family roles. It's not perfect, not always comfortable, but it's honest in a way our previous relationship never was. "I wish we had seen you," my father said during a recent call, a simple acknowledgement that meant more than elaborate apologies could have. "Really seen you." "I wish that too," I replied. "But I see myself now, and that matters more." My mother's journey has been more complex. Decades of enabling behavior don't disappear overnight, and she struggles with guilt while simultaneously trying to redefine her identity beyond being James's defender. We connect primarily through her interest in my writing, now something she never showed during my childhood. Small steps, but meaningful ones. James and I have not spoken since his incarceration began. He declined my one letter, and I respect that boundary. Whatever healing he needs is his own journey now. I wish him neither harm nor particular good, simply the opportunity to confront his own truths as I have confronted mine. The most profound lesson in all of this has been understanding that family trauma doesn't heal through revenge or even justice in the traditional sense. It heals through truth-seeking liberation from denial and the courage to build something new from the ashes of what was lost. My childhood cannot be recovered or rewritten, but my adult life is entirely my own creation. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean reconciliation or forgetting. Sometimes it simply means releasing the expectation that the past could have been different. My parents did the best they could with their own limitations, harmful as the results were. Understanding this doesn't excuse their actions, but does allow me to move forward without being anchored to old pain. For anyone listening who recognizes their own story in mine, know this. Your worth isn't determined by your family's ability to see it. The hardest prisons to escape are the ones built from others' perceptions, but freedom comes in recognizing that those walls exist only in the mind. You can walk away and build something beautiful for yourself. The family we create through chosen connections often provides the belonging our birth families couldn't offer. Samantha and the Garcia family showed me more genuine care in occasional interactions than my parents did in years of daily contact. These relationships taught me what healthy love looks like, allowing me to recognize and create it in my own life. The greatest revenge against those who couldn't see your value isn't making them suffer, but living so fully in your own truth that their opinion becomes irrelevant to your happiness. Not irrelevant to your heart, perhaps that wound never fully heals, but irrelevant to your understanding of who you truly are. Some truths take time to emerge like seeds planted deep that only show themselves seasons later. The monster my parents created through their blind devotion was not my doing, nor was his exposure my revenge. It was simply the natural unfolding of consequences too long delayed. I can breathe now. I can exist without the constant companion of invisibility. I can speak without wondering if anyone is listening. These simple freedoms are the true victory, not whatever karma eventually found my brother, or whatever recognition finally came from my parents. Have you ever felt unseen in your own family? Have any of you created distance from toxic relationships to protect your own well-being? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Each experience of finding your voice after being silenced is a victory worth celebrating. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of resilience and truth. And remember, some truths take time to be heard, but speaking them is the first step toward freedom. Thank you for listening to my story.